Hi guys, we are in the book of 1 Timothy and the series is the life of the church. Thank you for watching this sermon. If you are not in a local church, find a church in your community because the church is God's plan A. Our prayer is that this sermon is a blessing to you. God bless. Good morning, church. Guys, it's an interesting time where we find ourselves in the book of Timothy. We finished 4 chapters and we head to another large section. And this is a very interesting large section because this large section will cover from chapter 5 and verse 1 to chapter 6 and verse 2. And this large section will only focus on relationships within the church. Relationships within how we relate to one another in this house, how we relate to widows, how we care for them, how we relate to those we serve, and those who are our bosses, how we relate that way. That's how relationships ought to be done in the household of God. So, for many Christians and for many believers, it's fairly easy to walk into a corporate worship setting and walk out. Would you agree? It's fairly easy to do that. It's fairly easy to sing a couple of songs, listen to a sermon, and walk right out the door like nothing happened. It's called routine. It's called business as usual, right? Now, what that does is, for some of us, we don't even know the person seated next to us. We just come in and we go out. But who is seated next to us, we say, man, it's just another guy, another lady. That's who it is. But they don't know I'm in a rush to go somewhere. Guys, if your oven is on 220 and you've got a timer, the roast won't burn. Technology works that the ovens can switch off. Right? But unfortunately, we live in such a busy culture that we forget to invest in people. Furthermore, one line I love hearing in church is, shouldn't we respect people's privacy? A couple of weeks ago, Craig preached a sermon, and this line stuck by me. Craig said, it's none of your business has to die because we are family. And in your family, there's no secrets. We speak to one another, right? So what if I tell you, the people sitting beside you in the pew week after week, if they are genuine followers of Christ, are your family? Would that change your slipping in and your slipping out? Because when I go to a family gathering, I get there early because there's someone I want to catch up with. And I leave last at times because I want to be making jokes till the end. Happens? Some of us are excited when we hear a family gathering. We're really excited not just for the food, but we're excited for who we're going to see. Right? When it comes to church, if somebody is a follower of Christ,
Ewan Musawal.
How much more so should their business be my business? That's what Paul is covering in this chapter. Christ died for them.
And now,
to care for
here's Ewan Musawal.
I just heard the prayers this morning as they were praying for the people who got baptized, and they were like, Lord, they are part of a family. Great words. It's great words. It has to be backed by action. It's nice to say you my family. But will I walk that journey with you? You see, we ought to be concerned about one another. In fact, John chapter 1 verse 3, 1 John chapter 3 verse 14 and 18, John tells us that not loving fellow believers is evidence that we've not passed through death in life. It's evidence. So if we get here and we slip in and we slip out, it's evidence maybe that we are not saved. The matter of family is something true. I read a story 3 days ago and it baffled my mind. A man traveled as a missionary to Latin America and he done a mission trip there. He stayed with a Christian family that was desperately poor. All they owned were the clothes on their backs, a tiny one-room shelter, and one chicken outside. It's all they owned. And they opened their home to this missionary to come live. Right? No abundance. I don't have the aircon you have in your home. I also don't have the nice bean to cup coffee you drink in your household. I only have the clothes on my back and a chicken. Welcome, brother, into my home. Now, for some of us, we'll be like, it's uncomfortable here. This is not where I should be. I don't like it here. This missionary is not here for the conditions of the home. He's here for the spreading of the gospel. For some of us, the conditions is how we spread the gospel. If the conditions are conducive, we share. If the conditions aren't conducive, we don't share. Think about it. Imagine, Chris, you invited to my home. All I own is this jacket. One room. We all sleeping together there. We're fighting for the corner. There's no space. It doesn't even say, the story I read says, doesn't even say they had a toilet in the one room. Lord, I don't think I should be here. This call is too hard for me. They opened their door.
The following sermon is
As
by
the trip drew to a close, this broke
Pastor
host family
at Crystal
held a
Park
dinner
Baptist
in
Church,
honor
Benoni,
of their guest,
South Africa.
at which
To
soup
find out more,
was the main
follow
course.
us on Facebook and
To the man's
Instagram
surprise,
at Crystal
he found
Park
meat
Baptist Church.
in the soup. He realized we're having chicken soup. Right? And in all of this man is overwhelmed. Tears began streaming down from his cheeks. Why? Because he knew it's their only chicken. And he asked the host, he said, why would you do this for me? I'm no special man. The father of the home responded, this should be the most natural thing to do for anyone who follows Jesus. Furthermore, you are my brother in Christ. Therefore, my chicken is your chicken. Let's dine. That's family. That's getting in one another's business. Even though it's my last, I'll sacrifice it for you. That's family. Are we that kind of family? That's what Paul calls the church to. My outline would look something like this, and it would say, how do we relate to everybody, verse 1 and 2? Caring for the widows, verse 3 and 9, and widows to be registered, verse 10 to verse 15. Let's pray and let's dive in. Oh Lord, it's great to open your word. Father, as your word is opened, we know you are speaking. Give us ears to hear, hearts to receive. May lives be transformed, and may this word not return void. In Jesus' name, amen. So, the first two verses, Paul speaks about how we ought to relate to one another. He gives lovely instructions. He says older men, he says younger men, he says older women, and he says younger women. So, and that's the pattern of this chapter. He'll also, when he get to the widows, Paul navigates it like a good author. He'll then label older widows, younger widows. So there's a trend as we go through this, right? And as Paul speaks, he says, Timothy, you're a young man. We just encouraged you to show the people that you are saved. And you do it in love, in purity, in those 5 virtues, right? So he said that to Timothy. And just in verse 16 in chapter 4, he says, Timothy, watch your life and your doctrine. I'm charging you for this, right? And Timothy's charged with this. And now it says, do not rebuke an older man, but encourage him. The instructions are comprehensive. It covers all four possible relationships within the church. Do you see it? Look around, guys. Don't worry of me. I'm not going unless the rapture happens. But I'm not going. Look around. Who's next to you? Look to the back, guys. See who's there. Right? Paul is covering every person in the church. Do you see it? Right? So as Paul covers every person in the church, I want to say this. Treating people with respect isn't cultural. It's biblical. It's an order by God for us to respect one another. Right? So with that said, Paul says, The respect we have for our elders does not mean older men can do as they please. That's not the blanket statement there. Timothy, let them do as they please. Just back down. No. It's how you rebuke them. So what Paul is saying is there's going to be a moment to rebuke. How do you do that? How do you conduct that rebuke? You see, when Timothy is to correct the heresies, the sin, the scandals, or rebuke them, it shouldn't be overbearing. It should not be a place to give a tongue lashing. And for some of us younger men, we always think we can tell older people better. It should not be a tongue lashing. Instead of being harsh, we should appeal to older men as fathers. Would you speak to your father that way, is the question. Whenever you are addressing an older man, would you speak to your father in the tone you speak to that man? If not, correct yourself. If not, correct yourself. If you think, I've been waiting for a long time to lash out at that uncle, check your heart. Ask God to forgive you, because what Paul says is, we have to treat them as we would our fathers. And I know for many of us, we won't backchat our fathers. Unless you're a very high-risk individual. And I can tell you the saying of high risk, high reward is true. Because that risk has a reward. The reward is not a nice one. Right? So imagine you come at a tongue lashing at an elder gentleman. Think if he treats you the way your father would have treated you in that moment. What would happen? The same fear I have for my father is the same fear I should have for anyone older than me. Young men should be treated differently than older men. Timothy said that the younger brothers are his equals. So when we are walking as equals, it's Timothy, I know you've walked with me, Paul. I understand that you've gleaned from my knowledge. You're a knowledgeable man. But when you're walking with your brothers, consider them equal. It doesn't matter what degree you possess or how smart you are. Consider your younger brothers as equals. So when you speak to them with the respect of an equal. And then he switches gears and he speaks to older women. And I love when it comes to older women. Why? Because Jesus recognized the personhood of women. They are no longer to be treated as property and therefore no longer to be demeaned. Right? So when Paul zooms in here and he says, older women as mothers, we should think back to how Jesus has treated women. They are not to be demeaned. They are not to be spoken down on. So when Timothy is to address an older woman, Timothy, the same way you speak to your mother Eunice, speak to them. When you rebuke in love. And don't tell me there's the rebuke without of love, because I need to tell them where to come straight. When we rebuke in love. That's the demeanor Timothy has to have. Timothy, as a loving son, speak to older women. For us in Crystal Park, as loving daughters and sons, speak to older women. That's respect. God's getting order in his household. Then, to younger women in the church. Timothy, we are to honor them. We are to protect their purity. You get that? Tumelo, you're a brother, right? I'm a brother to a sister. That relationship is one of protection. Right? Andrew, you won't let nothing happen to Natalie, right? It's brotherly instinct. Can anyone relate to that? Right. So when Paul speaks to Timothy, he says the young woman within the church, protect them, honor them, watch their purity. Don't let them fall into the trap of the enemy. When you see them going off, bring them back as a loving brother would to his blood relative sister. We all agreed that we'll protect our relatives. This is family. If you see one lady's being led astray that is young, treat her as a sister. Protect her at all costs. And for us brothers who think we can date younger women the way we want to, we ought to protect them. It's not about I'm seeking whom I want to marry and I wash through ladies. That's not the instruction here. The instruction is treat them, care for them, protect them. I hope that changes the way we look at one another in the church. That is not a way to just slip out and slip in. Because I won't just slip out and slip in at a family gathering. I guarantee you I'm grabbing a plate of food. I'm grabbing some drink. I'm making some jokes. I'm catching up with people I haven't seen in a long time. And for some of us, the only time we see our families really is at funerals. And then all of a sudden, the after tears is long, eh? Because we don't want to go home. Right? But let's make time. And I'll go as far as saying this. The way we treat the people in the church here as our family reflects what we do at home, guys. So if you're saying, I'm a loving husband at home, let's see it here. The fruit must speak. And Timothy is called to do these things. He's called to show tender compassion and wisdom as he speaks to younger women. And then Paul switches gears in this and he says, Timothy, you ought to care for the widows. The provision of widows was deeply rooted in Jewish tradition. Deuteronomy 10 and verse 18. Can we go there, please? Did you get your Bible? That if you needed a Bible so we can follow? 10 verse 18. Let's read. Deuteronomy 10:18 says, He executes justice. He, God, executes justice for the fatherless and the widow, and loves the sojourner, giving him food and clothing. Deuteronomy 18 shows God cares for the orphan, God cares for the widow, and even the one traveling that doesn't have a home. God cares. Right? And then 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1 to verse 7. You can read that in your own time. But that story is so interesting. Why? Because a widow lost her husband. She only had her 2 kids, and the husband had debt with the king. And the king's way to collect was he was going to take those 2 boys in. Right? But what did God do? He sent a prophet. The prophet by the name of Elisha. And as he came there, he said to her, find any container. It doesn't matter shape, form, or size. Just find a container. What happens in that story? Pour that little oil. And that oil keeps flowing and flowing and flowing until there was no container. Not oil, containers. Now, if I'm that lady, Craig, I'm knocking everywhere for containers because I see this oil is just multiplying. Right? And what that shows is, through Elisha's ministry, God still cares for the widow. You have debt, your children might be captured, but I'll provide. Right? Then in Acts chapter 6, there's a record that goes, appoint 7 men with 3 characteristics. And why were those men appointed? Because there was a dispute of the feeding of the widows. And some felt like you are not looking after us, you are only looking after your kind. Look after us as well is the complaint. And the apostle says, guys, we are called to pray and to preach. But appoint 7 men so they can look after this. They didn't say, we are called to preach and to pray and we'll see what happens. They come up with a clear strategy. And the strategy is, appoint 7 men so we can continue our work, but the widows will be fed. God cares for the widows. Then James, in James chapter 1 and verse 27 will say, religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. There's just a picture through the old and the new of how God is caring for the widows. And now in this passage, Paul zooms in and he says, Timothy, we don't forget our call. It doesn't change. So, what are we doing intentionally to care for widows God has entrusted to our care? God is not only the father of the fatherless, He is the defender and protector of the widow. I know we live in a time of affluence. I know that. We live in a time of affluence. Why? We have pension funds. We have life policies. We have investments. And there are nursing homes. So why should the church do that? There's a call to look after the widows. And that little mention of affluence has become the biggest barrier in the 21st century. Is I've set myself up, I need no one to help me. Family helps out. Reach out. Then Paul breaks it down, man. He says we're going to look for real widows. Because in verse 5, he will say, she who is truly a widow. He gives a description. So there's a true widow and there's a false widow. But both are widows, right? Paul's opening line cuts to the chase. Honor widows who are truly widows. The term honor means assist, provide care and financial support. The description is phrased as truly widows. It appears 3 times. Here, verse 5 and verse 16. So Paul is going to unpack that. And the addition description in verse 5, he says, those who are left alone. Right? So now we see, he's unpacking what a true widow looks like. He says, Timothy, we ought to honor, provide care, financial assistance to these widows who are truly widows. Right, so Timothy has to assess truly widows. Then he says, after you find who are truly widows, find those who are left alone. You see the pattern? So there's a clear instruction how you ought to care for the widows. You see, being a widow did not qualify her for support. A widow was only to be supported by the church only if she was destitute, without resources, without a customary dowry, without no family to help her. Then the widow becomes the burden of the church. So Timothy would have to assess her CV. Does that make sense? Right? So he would have to assess the qualities of this widow before he says it's the burden of the church. Then there's godly widows. From verse 5 to verse 7, it would speak about, I think in verse 5 it would say, she who is truly a widow left alone has set her hope on God and continues in supplications and prayers night and day. She who has set her hope on God. That means it's a godly widow. So paired with brokenness, destitution, the second qualification for welfare is godliness. So now Timothy is like, okay, she doesn't have family. Now what? We still don't until we see fruit on the tree that she's godly. So you see the criteria now? It's getting a little smaller. Why? Because when I started this sermon, I said, we are a family, right? Christ brings us as one. So in this family, Timothy is sifting now, according to the instruction of Paul. And as he is sifting the widows, he is saying, truly a widow? Yes. Deserve honor? Wait. There's a second qualification. Is a hope on God and God alone. If not, pass the widow by. That's the call. It's hard, eh? But it's the instruction. R. Kent Hughes put it like this, and he said, the only widows who qualify for church support were those who were financially qualified through destitution and spiritually qualified through godliness. That's the 2 criteria to meet this. This morning, if you're like me, your question is, what about the widows who don't qualify for help? What happens to them? Verse 4. Verse 4 says, but if a widow has children or grandchildren, let them first learn to show godliness to their own household and to make some return to their parents. Last line is very important. For this is pleasing in the sight of God. So now we see the criteria is one that is destitute, one that's hope is on God. But now the one who doesn't qualify for church support, Timothy must check if they have relatives. This is an intensive interview. Right? It's not just, oh, your husband died, here's a food parcel. No, it's before I give you the food parcel, let me do due diligence. And sometimes in the church, we forget to do due diligence. That's the instruction here. So what is this family responsibility? They are to be taken care by their families. The inevitable fact of life happens this way. Once my mom held me in her hands. Once she changed me. Once she fed me. Once they provided for me. The return of that is once I will hold her. Once I will feed her. And once I will look after her. It's the circle of life. The circle of life says when you get older, someone needs to look after. And now we're not even speaking in the family as church, we're speaking in the family as blood relatives. So if a widow has children, let them look after her. Meaning, in our time of affluence, let them build a cottage in the yard. Am I preaching? Yes. Right, so start building cottages in the yard. Right? Let them build a cottage in the yard. Not just ship it to a nursing home. The passage is not speaking, and I'm not against nursing homes or any of those things, but the care of the family is important. That's why sometimes we get it wrong in church, because we're not focused on the call here. And the call here is to say, if she has family, let them take care. Why? Because that mother and that father poured into them when they were infants. They deserve to receive a reward. What an honor it is for us as children who was provided for to look after. Not because they ask, but because it's a demand on our lives to do. No, my budget is tight. There's no space. My wife and my mother don't see eye to eye. How's this dynamic going to happen? The call is look after the widow. Figure out the dynamic, but look after the widow. We make those dynamics excuses not to do. And then when your mom or your dad finds themselves in crazy places, you're like, if only I done this. And when us as children actually look after our family, the fifth commandment comes in full fruition. We honor them. We care for them. We love them. By doing this, we show godliness to our household, which means we represent the king well. Looking after your parents is not a burden, it's a call from God. Now, what happens if we don't do this? The last line speaks of we will find it pleasing in the sight of God if, as family, we look after our parents. The opposite of that is if we don't, it's displeasing in the sight of God. Then there's a negative found in verse 8. The negative will be, but if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for the members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So Paul brings judgment now. For us who said, I don't have enough money, I don't have this, I shouldn't be doing this. Why didn't they have a pension fund? They worked hard. Why didn't they? Hey. Verse 8. Verse 8. Verse 8 speaks. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, the Ewan inscribed version would say, how much more would you provide for people in the church? Because here the excuse is we're not blood. Our blood is actually tighter here than my blood relative. Because the blood that paid for us, that makes us equal at the foot of the cross, that opens the gate of heaven. That blood that unites us here ought to make us say, oh Lord, I don't want to be found not providing for my relatives. Right? But what does this do? Christian children, believers, genuine ones, are to care for their parents. They are to. And why would Paul say they would look worse than the unbeliever? Why? Because even the Romans knew to take care of their parents. Even the unbelieving Roman took their mother in when the father passed away. Then Paul says, how much more you, a child of God? Because if you don't, you are worse than the Roman. The unbelieving Roman, you are worse than him. In our time, the unbelieving guy that's your neighbor, you are worse than him. The unbelieving person in your office, you are worse than them. Because I can guarantee you, at work, you have that one colleague, and that one colleague is looking after their parents and their in-laws. Right? And as they are doing that, you are saying, not me. You are worse than them. That's the judgment. Do you want to be found worse than an unbeliever? After Christian family takes care of its own, the church must take care of the real widows. You see the sifting. I love it. The sifting is so great. Because when Timothy was sifting according to the call and the criteria, Paul says, now, if they are family members, send them there. Right? And as they go there, now find the ones who really don't have family. That's the church's responsibility. That's the call of the church. Now we found the true widows, the ones whose hope is set on God. They are praying day and night. We found them. They don't have any family, which means who is looking after them? Who is providing for them? God says, we have a family. The household, my bride, is there to care for them. That's the call. And then in verse 9 to verse 15, oh boy, they ought to be registered. The focus in verse 3 to verse 8 has been on financial maintenance of widows. This would be widows that can't do anything. The church is looking after them. But the widows from verse 9, to verse 15 is ones who can give of service to the church. It's ones who are probably, the age their requirement would be 60. Here we know, 60 for ladies. Okay, I know the work laws has changed, but you are eligible for retirement. And for a man, it's 65, but those things are shifting, right? So what that is saying is, when they are eligible for retirement, use their skill set for service in the church. That's this list from verse 9 now. It's no more just giving out financial contributions. Now the story shifts and it says, find those who can actually serve the body and serve the body well. How would they do this? We read now of a list, a roll, a registry of widows. And there's a different set of qualifications from verse 9a to verse b. From verse 9b to verse 10, we'll find a list there. And the list would read, if she is not less than 60 years of age, having been the wife of one husband, and having a reputation for good works, if she has brought up children, has shown hospitality, has washed the feet of the saints, has cared for the afflicted, and has devoted herself to every good work. That's a list. That's a list of qualifications now. What does that list look like? Paul unpacks, I think that's 5, right? Have you counted? Just make sure it's 5-fold. It's 5. 5 practical ways we ought to look like. What? More? Really? What you counting separately? Right? So, what do we see? We see there's a pledge. They were hospitable, which means they opened their homes. They invited people. Right? They washed the feet. And it's not physically, in our time, it won't be physically washing feet, but it would be serving my brother and sister in any capacity and in any form. Back there, it would be a washing of feet. For us today, we don't wash feet, but we serve one another. So the widow here would have served people in every way. It's part of a DNA is to serve people. So Timothy would be zooming in on that her life is given to service. It's there. Boy, then she has to be 60 years of age. Then that begs the question, what happens to a widow of 40? What happens to a widow of 50? Because the criteria speaks of age. What happens to a widow of 59? Let's get it as close to 60 as possible. Right? What would happen? Should be our question. You see, 60 was culturally recognized as the age of retirement, as well as the age when remarriage was unlikely. Today is different. Today we have apps. These apps are hooking us up, right? And in all of this, some 60-plus-year-olds are still getting married, right? But if they are getting married, then the church is not looking after them. And God be praised. Right? But the call here is, guys, 60 years old is just not finding someone anymore. It's limited. The scope of finding a partner is rare. Right? So, because of that, it's the ideal time for the widow to commit herself to singleness and ministry. It's the ideal time in that situation. Then she should show faithfulness. Where? In her home. How did she show faithfulness? She never cheated on her husband. She was a one-man woman. That's the faithfulness. So imagine if you, Timothy, there's really a lady here who's just lost a loved one. You have to enroll her on a list. And the first question, Chris, is, did you cheat on your husband? Like, it's rough, right? I was reading this passage this week and I'm like, yo. Right? Guys, I love, my mind works. I see pictures when I read these things, right? And as I see that, I'm like, man, the seriousness of caring for widows is so serious that we ought to interrogate so we do it well. Because we represent a king who protects them. So when Timothy is sifting, he says, were you faithful? Yes, I was. The neighbor says, no, she wasn't. Because it's easy to tell me you were faithful. Right? So Timothy wouldn't just question the widow. He'd ask the neighbor, was she faithful? Did she serve? Because you're going to blow your own horn. Think about it. I want the gift from the church. I need the money. I need to survive. I'm going to say everything they want me to say. It's like when you go for an interview and you lie. It's the same. And you shouldn't lie. Right? But you tell things you know is not your skill set because you're so desperate for the job. Right? Now imagine, the church is going to care for her until Jesus comes back or until she dies. She's desperate. Is Timothy just going to interview her or is he going to ask the family of God? Who is that? Fruit has to be on that tree that she faithfully served, that she is a child of God, that she didn't cheat on her husband. And all of a sudden, these answers come back and Timothy is like, okay, we can enlist her. We can look after her. Furthermore, good works are described in fivefold practicalities. She's brought up her children. She's shown hospitality. She's washed the feet of the saints. She's cared for those in affliction. And she's devoted to every good work. Then I beg the question again. All that is for widows 60 and above. What about the one who's 59? Where does she fit in? And Paul says, younger widows. And he lays down conditions for the registration of widows. It's clear that younger widows, according to that criteria, would not qualify. Paul gives Timothy a different set of instructions for those ladies. And it starts in verse 11. In verse 11 he says, but refuse, strong word, which says, don't. Don't even consider enrolling. Whoa, Paul is hard, man. Right? He just gave us such a lovely picture of how to look after the one that's 60. But the younger one, he says, Timothy, refuse to enlist her. Which means she doesn't qualify already. Why? Why would that be? Why? Because but refuse to enroll younger widows. For when their passions draw them away from Christ, they may desire to marry. Younger widows have urges. Guys, they were married, they are single now, they are still passionate beings. They won't commit themselves to the things of the Lord wholeheartedly. Don't register them for that reason, because they won't solely be devoted on God. So that happens. And then Timothy should be encouraged naturally to tell somebody younger than 60, guys, age is on your side. Get married. Get married. Why? Because your desires, your natural inclination is still at work. You won't be wholeheartedly committed to the service of God. Get married. Care for your household again. That's the call. It's a strong one. Rather than just being single. But if you're committed to being single and you're going to kill your urges, then commit yourself. But if not, get married. Because the church is not going to look after you. It says refuse to enlist them. It's a rough word. The second reason for not registering younger widows seems to be uncertain, whether they will be able to concentrate on reasonable service. Instead, they get into a habit of idleness. Idleness is the devil's playground. Right? What happens when we idle? We start looking around. Right? We start looking who's doing what, who's saying what. My eyes have time to wander. Right? So as the eyes are wandering and they're paying attention, some versions will say they are drawn into gossip. Now, I imagine it like this, guys. Where I grew up, people wore gowns. Right? Pink gowns, blue gowns, not white gowns, because they get dirty. Right? People wore gowns, not the silk robes, those thick, whether the sun is shining or not. Now I envision idleness this way because of my upbringing. So stick with me. They stand with the gown at the gate with the tea in the hand, right? And they look in the street. What's happening? I feel like there's many people who grew up like me. Right? And they stand and look in the street because they are idle. They have nothing to do. The reruns of Days of Our Lives and all those things are done. So now I have nothing but time. Idleness. Right? And now they are drawn to the gossip on the street. Then they become busybodies. The text will say they go from house to house. With that gown, brother, house to house, they go. And as they go, what are they talking about? What are they doing? Clearly, they are distracted from the call of God. That's why Paul says, refuse to enlist them. Because there'll be a period where they stand at the gate, lay like this, with their arms crossed, looking when the school children comes home and says, I see you there. Guys, I grew up like this. I'm reliving my childhood. Right? And then go to the neighbor and say, did you see so-and-so's child? You become busy with the wrong stuff. Guys, gossip is sin. Let's not take it lightly. It's sin. So why Paul is saying he can't enlist them is because they're not wholeheartedly committed to God. They still live in a lustful, passionate, sinful life. They won't be of good service to the church. So my brother, let them go look after family. Let them get married. Because when they are idle, they do gossip, busybodies, and they say things they ought not to. So I counsel young widows to marry. When younger widows have remarried, they will, of course, have their hands full. You have a husband? Your hands are full. Trust me, Latoya's hands are full. It's full. Micah's nothing. She has to deal with me. Her hands are full. So she's occupied on looking after me. So, younger woman, go get married so you can have your hands full. So you will not be idle. So you will not have time to gossip. You can't put on your gown, stand by the gate, and see what's happening because you have things to do. That's the call. That's why we don't enlist them. It is important not to give the enemies of the gospel any further occasion to slap the church as bad. We shouldn't give them a reason to bring the gospel in disrepute. How do we do that? We tell them, get married. Please, till death done you part. God bless. Find another. Why? Because verse 15 is important. For some have already strayed after Satan. Why? Because we live in this sinful nature. We love each other. We're so idle, we can gossip. No, get busy. That's the call. Paul counsels family members to care for widows to prevent additional burden to the church. The person who should help is a believing woman. The end of the verse shows Paul's concern for the true widows in verse 16. Verse 16, Paul will say, if any believing woman has relatives who are widows, let her care for them. Let the church not be burdened, so that it may care for those who are truly widows. That's why there's a criteria. There's a sifting. So everybody is not the burden of the church. There is other people who ought to take responsibility for this. Let's conclude. Paul's instructions have a number of practical applications. Churches have a clear responsibility to support widows. And I want to pause here because I want to zoom in for a while. And what I want to zoom in on is not even just caring for the widows. I want to take it one further and say caring for those who have less than us. Right? The church has a mercy ministry. You hear of it? This church is soft. I expect the visitors not to know of it. You heard of it? Yes. Right. Christmas is coming up, right? My appeal to you as a pastor is let's provide for others who don't have. When we do our grocery shopping, let's put the bucket in. There's a Christmas hamper. At Checkers, it's $1.99. At Pick n Pay, it's $2.79. But put one of those buckets in and let's care for those who don't have. Let's not just hear sermons on how to care. Let's practically put it into practice. So from next week, I'm watching the grocery box. I'll lead by example and I'll put in mine. But let's all commit to giving a good Christmas to those who are less fortunate than us. That's practical application, right? Now we get back to the passage. That was an ad. Churches have a clear responsibility to support widows who are devoid of relatives, dependent on God, devoted to prayer. It's a non-negotiable. May the gospel of Christ compel us to look out for the most vulnerable among us. How would we know who the most vulnerable among us are if we just slip in and slip out? It's none of my business. How would we know that? The gospel of Christ, may it compel us to do research, to see who's the most vulnerable among us. Why? Because when the most vulnerable is among us, may we as a church care for them. May we show them the love of the gospel that transformed our lives. It truly did. We just baptized 6 people. The love of God transforms. May we show that love to the vulnerable. May we see our church and many other churches not simply as places where individuals gather, but as families of faith who take care of one another with particular concern for the orphans and the widows.